Hey guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ansman Performance. So today we're going to discuss how we can break up the different parts of the pitching delivery and kind of body segments, and how we train each of these segments differently once we get past kind of a basic level of competency. All right, so when you first start training, you need to get good at what's called training the train, right? So what this means is you just get really good at like the really basic stuff. So you need to learn how to move well through the core movements, which you're eventually going to load heavy and or fast, okay? Once we get past that basic level, we've acquired this basic level of like relative strength, stability, and movement quality, right? So like a beginner level, we can begin to kind of advance what we're doing in terms of intensity and complexity. All right, so then we can start viewing the body segments a little bit differently in terms of how we train them. They don't all just need to be trained for like maximal strength or maximal velocity or whatever. We can get a little bit more specific about where we are on the force velocity curve, kind of how we train these tissues in terms of like the specific muscle action types that are going to predominate these, like their jobs during the delivery, all these different things. So if we kind of break down the pitching delivery, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but we'll take it into like kind of four pretty basic body segments. So we have the rear leg. And so what is its job, right? It needs to overcome inertia and it gets that movement started. All right, so this isn't like javelin or cricket or any of these things where we have kind of a running start. We're starting from a static start. So the requirements for strength in this segment are going to be a little bit higher than they may be in those other two athletic endeavors. Okay, so the rear leg, we're thinking about this in terms of kind of an externally rotated kind of hip position from the athlete. It's going to need to hinge and coil. All right, obviously for the internally rotated athlete, that's going to be a little bit different, but we're not really going to dive into that today. It's a topic for a different video. So it needs to hinge and coil, and this is how we kind of place a stretch on the tissues of the hip, which will then kind of be utilized in terms of elastic energy later in the delivery. And we need to produce this in the horizontal plane as much as possible. So we can think about this in terms of like acceleration during sprinting. So at the beginning of a sprint, we have a greater percentage of our force being produced horizontally as opposed to vertically. So we need enough vertical force that we can still stay upright and not fall over, but we want to produce as much horizontal force as we possibly can within those parameters. As we get closer and closer to max velocity, it becomes more and more vertical. All right? Similar idea here with throwing. We need to be able to shift into that horizontal force vector as much as possible, so we're producing as much of that force away from the plate as we possibly can and moving us in the direction of the throw. And so that requires a decent amount of strength to be able to do that and kind of hold that externally rotated and horizontally abducted position until we fire into internal rotation and a little bit of hip extension there. So how do we train this? So this is going to be your kind of higher force options. So if we're thinking about hinge and hip extension, trap bar deadlifts tend to be a pretty decent option there. In terms of getting a little bit more plane specific, we can do a loaded sled drag horizontally is a good option. We can load that fairly heavy. And then when you get a little bit more advanced than that, then this becomes kind of like the lateral bounds. So whether these are loaded with a medicine ball or resisted or something along those, these longer contact times, right? If we think about this in terms of a counter movement jump for like a basketball player, these are your kind of higher force ballistic movements. Same kind of deal here. That's what we're going to use for the rear leg, okay? And then we can move on to the lead leg. So what is going to be required of the lead leg? We need a lot of stiffness, right? So a little bit more compliance here, a little bit more time to produce force, more stiffness here, right? Less time to kind of resist and transfer that energy and those high forces that we're going to encounter, because we're going to get about 2 times body weight ground reaction forces when that foot strikes the ground, right? So pretty high. So we need to be able to resist any additional kind of movement in that direction. We don't want to see that knee collapse. We need to be able to stop and reverse the direction of the force against the direction of the throw, okay? Really important there. And so what needs to happen here? Right, so we're looking for a lot of eccentric and isometric strength specifically, okay? So we need that muscle to lengthen very quickly and stop abruptly, all right? We need to be able to do both of those things in the context of the lead leg block. All right, so the way we train this is going to be a little bit different. So this is going to be higher velocity, primarily right? If we're getting really specific about this, it's going to be fast eccentrics or isometrics, either overcoming, oscillating along those lines. And you can progress this a few different ways, but like thinking about short contact times on the jumps, stiff contacts, and then if we want to get a little bit more specific as we go, we can combine these two elements. So we could go with like a lateral bound to a jump back, and then combine these two pieces and get really, really specific about it. So thinking about training these things just a little bit differently. This could also be with depth, single leg depth jumps with a short contact time. You could eventually get there. All of these are ways that we could kind of progress this to get more stiffness and more requirements the lead legs going to have there. Midsection, similar to the lead leg actually, right? And so what's going to happen here, same deal, stiffness, energy transfer. It's going to provide a stable base for those mobile segments. So what that means is the lumbar spine really isn't going to offer, or shouldn't offer too much rotation, flexion, extension, any of these things. It's really meant to be kind of a stable joint that the thoracic spine can then rotate freely on top of. But if we don't have adequate strength and stiffness here, we've got problems. So one of the ways that hip-shoulder separation is created is by the contralateral external oblique firing, right, to resist further rotation when that foot strikes. And so that needs to happen at a really high velocity, and those are high forces that we're talking about as well. And so how do we train this, for example, right? I mean, like side planks aren't going to do that. It's just not high enough force or velocity. So we can do like abrupt stop landmines and progress those from there, where we're dropping the load at the top, remaining relaxed, and then stopping it like it's hitting a concrete floor. All right, that's what we want to be able to do, and that's really what's required of the midsection if we're going to have a high velocity kind of midsection there, right? So sit-ups, crunches, those kinds of things are only going to take you so far. This really needs to be progressed to a further realm kind of beyond those things. I really wouldn't use sit-ups and crunches anyway, but just as an example, planks, side planks, all those things are only going to take you so far. There's a lower level kind of core competency things that we need to get in those beginner stages. Then we need to go to the higher force, higher velocity kind of end of the spectrum and get a little bit more specific about what we're asking of the midsection. Then finally, we got the pecs and lats. So these are really your big money accelerators of the arm here, right? So we need elasticity, but we also need a lot of strength from these elements, all right? So both of these are going to be asked to store significant elastic energy. The pec, when the arm gets kind of lagged behind the body, and the lat, when the arm's being laid back. And both of these need to be really strong in order to adequately do this. So if we kind of think about like if a really, really weak athlete went and tried to do some really high impact depth jumps from a high height, they probably wouldn't do very well at remaining stiff and getting the most out of kind of that elastic storage and utilization. The same is true here. So we're not expecting anybody to bench 400 pounds or anything like that, but you do need to be strong through a full range of motion there. And then we can get more specific in terms of training the elasticity and stuff there. So things like shock push-ups, things like a lat drop to like a bar where you rebound off of it. You can progress all of these things as you go, starting with just kind of like a dead stop and then returning that energy, all of those things. That's how you can kind of get more specific there and layer that. But you will eventually need to train these body parts in these more specific ways as you go in order to kind of maximize each segment's capability in a high velocity pitching delivery. If you got any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out either in the comments below or via email. If you're interested in learning more about remote or in-person training, you can check out the videos that we have here on YouTube about remote training. You can check out the site for more information, or you can shoot me an email. Thanks for watching, and check us out next time.